In Greenland, we are a community. We take care of each other. Back in the days when the hunters would catch game, they would make sure that everybody in the settlement had food. When I am in Greenland, I feel confident that people would catch me if I fell.
In a tiny workshop in Nuuk, Nadia Anarak-Koitsman carefully shapes a piece of metal. To the untrained eye, it's an unidentifiable sea creature. But for Nadia, it's an important Inuit symbol.
I love how I'm able to tell a story through my jewelry about who we are and who we were. At the moment, I'm making Greenlandic shrimp earrings. If I wear these in other parts of the world, they will think, okay, she's wearing a huge shrimp. But up here, we're like, oh my God. Then it's a big part of what we survive on.
Indigenous identity is seeing a revival in Greenland, ahead of a March 11 general election. The vote was called after U.S. President Donald Trump said he wanted to acquire the strategically located Arctic island. Trump's interest has shaken the status quo, and combined with the growing Inuit pride, has led some locals to view the election as a historic chance to free Greenland from Danish influence. The island was a Danish colony until 1953, when it officially became part of Denmark. Then, Danish authorities initiated a forced relocation of Inuit to larger towns, marginalizing the traditional practices and languages of an indigenous people who make up almost 90% of the population.
For many years, it was embarrassing being Greenlandic for a lot of people, and they would suppress the Greenlandic culture and trying to be more Danish in their appearance, in their way of living.
Relations between Greenland and Denmark have been strained over the past decade by revelations of historic misconduct by Danish authorities, including the removal of Inuit children from their families and forced contraception for women and girls. In 2022, Denmark publicly apologized to the victims of a 1950s experiment in which children from Greenland were taken to Denmark. As understanding about colonial repression spreads, the Inuit cultural resurgence in Greenland has taken off.
Without culture, there would be no identity. My name is Kim Kleist Eriksson, and I'm an artist in Greenland. I do art with walrus tusks and walrus cranium, and I've always been interested in strengthening our Greenlandic culture.
Eriksson's carvings aim to keep an old Greenlandic art form alive. For him, this cultural renaissance is intertwined with the political push for independence.
I want to share my knowledge, so I've been working in trying to create a workshop for my own where I can teach other people that want to learn the art. What's independence for me? So our culture will be much stronger, I hope.
The independence movement here has been growing since the 1970s and is supported by all main political parties. But they differ on how and when it could be achieved, given the country's reliance on Denmark for half its annual budget. Reuters spoke to more than a dozen Greenlanders, all of whom said they favored independence from Denmark and the United States.
As of late, I've noticed a different shift in the politics due to Trump's interest in Greenland. I know he wants to buy it, but what kind of guy tried to buy a country in 2025?
A recent poll indicated that 85% of Greenlanders don't want to become part of the U.S.
I was kind of in disgust that he wanted to do that. I'd love to work with the United States and not be part of the United States, but be proud Inuits of Greenland and our own government here.
Independence for Greenland could pave the way for more U.S. influence on the island, and it comes at a time when the Arctic region has increasingly come into the geopolitical spotlight.
And I also have a message tonight for the incredible people of Greenland.
Trump has proposed buying Greenland, citing China and Russia's Arctic presence among the reasons for his interest in the country. He says he supports Greenland's right to determine its future and that he would welcome Greenland into the United States of America if it chose to join.
I've been working on Greenland for years. I think President Trump gets it. You know, he's resolute.
Thomas Emmanuel Dans was U.S. Arctic Commissioner during Trump's first presidency. He sees this as a key moment in Greenland's history, a time for action, he says.
I think whatever comes, you know, and how it ends up, the train has left the station. You know, we'll see, like, Greenland is opening up.
Despite what many see as a historic chance for independence, worries remain. Like most Greenlanders, Kreutzmann wants her country to become independent, but understands the road is long.
I'm actually really, really concerned that we would become independent too soon. Because I'm scared of our economy and who would be able to lift up society, keeping it where it is now. We like our society as it is, and we just want to be Greenlandic.
Marvin Starblanket was 16 when he received his first criminal charge for robbery and assault. 22 violent convictions have followed.
I hated the system, I guess. I was angry and bitter, and thought if I did something violent enough, if I got aggressive enough, I'd protect myself from people.
The 42-year-old is a member of the Mistawasis First Nation, an Indigenous nation from Saskatchewan, Canada. He's now been out of prison for 2.5 years, but Starblanket isn't a free man. He's under a 5-year supervision order. This gives the Correctional Service of Canada a say over where he sleeps, this halfway house, what time he checks in, which job he pursues. Starblanket's order was imposed after his latest stint in prison for holding up a convenience store with a taser. These supervision orders are meant to address rare cases of people who pose an ongoing risk to the public. But similar provisions in the US and UK are usually reserved for sex offenders. Figures show Indigenous people, who make up about 5% of Canada's population, account for more than a third of Canadians under these orders. And previously unreported Correctional Service data reveal that the number of Indigenous people subject to strict conditions upon finishing their sentence rose 53% in the 10 years to 2024. That's more than 4 times the rate of increase for white people.
I don't want to be asking for permission forever, and I won't be.
So why is Starblanket in this situation, and where does the Canadian government come into it? Data show Indigenous people are overrepresented when it comes to breaching conditions, and they are more likely than white people to be denied full parole, even when their parole officer recommends it, parole board data shows. Some argue there is an upside to supervision, as it comes with resources, such as psychological counseling and drug treatment. But if Starblanket violates his conditions or is deemed at risk of doing so, he could be sent back to prison. The combination of these orders and parole denials has deepened Indigenous people's mass incarceration under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. When he entered office in 2015, Trudeau pledged a total renewal of the relationship between Canada and Indigenous people, aiming to eliminate their overrepresentation in custody within 10 years. But as Trudeau plans to step down on March 9th, disparities have widened. Indigenous people now account for about 1/3 of federal inmates, up from 1/5 in 2015. The Justice Ministry and Prime Minister's office did not respond to requests for comment. Lawyers, advocates, and judges told Reuters the impact of poverty and intergenerational trauma cannot be ignored.
When the aura of being Indigenous, intergenerational survivor, living that tough life, at some point they start to feel like that's not an excuse. You know, you're just a messed up person if you continue to keep being at odds with the law.
Court documents show Starblanket was abused as a child by a male relative. When he was 5, his father died by suicide in police custody. At 7, his mother, a sex worker at the time, was jailed for the manslaughter of a violent client. She was eventually pardoned, and Starblanket began shuttling between his mother and several foster homes. He went on to live a life of violent crime and substance abuse.
Well, at the time I was involved in a high-risk lifestyle of doing drugs, drinking, hanging around people that weren't healthy for me, and I made some choices that were stupid.
By 2017, Canada was funding some Indigenous-specific prison programming, and in 2022, the same year Starblanket was released and put on the supervision order, the government repealed mandatory minimum sentences for some offenses. But the reforms didn't explicitly address long-term supervision orders.
I'm really centered around family.
Starblanket initially moved in with his partner under orders not to drink or do drugs. They had a baby, Anastasia. 14 months in, Starblanket did meth and was sent to the Halfway House, a facility that provides housing, meals, and services. Sticking to their conditions can be particularly hard for Indigenous people, Starblanket's lawyer, Mike Nolan, says.
You have chronic underemployment or unemployment, and we know the two single biggest factors reducing crime are employment and housing stability. And right now, a large percentage of our Indigenous population across the country do not have either one of those factors.
Starblanket's supervision order is up in November 2027. As much as he chafes under his restrictions, he appreciates the positives.
Being on parole and being in the halfway house, as much as it's a great support, and it's helped me a lot, there's those little small things like watching the clock, not being able to lay in with my partner Natasha and my children. It'd be more freeing because I'd be able to truly know I had my civil liberties back.
Once free, he plans to go to university to study psychology and become a voice for other Indigenous people caught up in the justice system. But with freedom comes the fear of adjusting to normal life, he says.
Say hi.
For the first time in 15 years, a prisoner was executed by firing squad in the United States. The execution occurred Friday evening in South Carolina, where convicted murderer Brad Sigmund was pronounced dead at 6:08 p.m., according to a spokesperson for the state's Department of Corrections. Sigmund chose to be killed by a firing squad, saying he feared the alternatives of the electric chair or lethal injection would risk a slower and more torturous death. Associated Press reporter Jeffrey Collins was one of 3 media witnesses.
Suddenly the shots rang out at, I believe Christy said it was 6:05 and 50 seconds. At that point you did see a small red stain on Sigmund's chest. It was irregularly shaped but oval, if that makes sense. I mean, like it wasn't like a circle, it was an oval shape. I saw it looked like he may have taken a couple of his chest rose and fell about 2 times immediately after the shots.
In 2001, Sigmund was convicted of beating to death his ex-girlfriend's parents, William and Gladys Lark, with a baseball bat at their home in the town of Taylors. A few hours before the scheduled execution time, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Sigmund's final petition to halt his killing. Before the execution, protesters stood outside the South Carolina Department of Corrections to express their disapproval.
I don't believe the state should be in the business of executing people. It wastes money,
We have alternatives. Life in prison without parole is cheaper.
I live here. I work here. I pay taxes here. They're doing this in my name, and I resent it. They're killing people. They're doing it in my name, and I think they have no business killing Brad or any of the other folks they killed over the last 40 years.
Since 1976, when the death penalty was reinstated in the U.S., there have only been 3 executions by firing squad. Most U.S. executions use lethal injection, introduced in the 1970s as a less outwardly violent method, but it has become the most frequently botched means of execution, according to the Death Penalty Information Center.
German election winner Friedrich Merz's Conservatives and the Social Democrats have concluded preliminary talks on forming a coalition government. The likely next chancellor announced the news to reporters on Saturday, alongside other party leaders.
We have a joint paper that forms the basis for the coalition negotiations, which we may start next week. In conclusion, I would like to say a few words about this. We have essentially reached agreement on 3 major issues. One is the issue of migration. The second is the issue of finance, and the third is the issue of the labor market and the economy.
In Germany, where coalitions are the norm, governments are typically formed in 2 phases. Parties first hold exploratory talks and then enter into formal coalition talks. The 2 parties were racing for a deal before next week, when they hope to push a loosening of Germany's borrowing limits through Parliament.
Пошкоджений транспорт, який був припаркований поруч з місцем обстрілу. Це тільки одна з пошкоджених будівель, інші зазнали.
Todas estas familias, hablamos de más de 1000 evacuados que tuvieron que dejar sus casas, puedan volver a sus hogares.
A Vista, en la ciudad de Bahía Blanca, cayeron 300 milímetros en 6 horas y la verdad que creo que ninguna ciudad del interior del país podría...
Y una situación que, bueno, ahora tendrá su parte también dolorosa de limpieza, de calcular los daños, cantidad de autos que terminaron abajo del agua.
Realmente.
También que tuvieron que refugiarse, que tuvieron que evacuarse.
Esto es importante porque hay mucha gente que no pudo cargar el celular y no se ha podido comunicar con sus familias para decirle estamos bien, así que ese listado de personas evacuadas, no solo en Bahía, también en Ingeniero White.
Dando una mano y poniendo el esfuerzo que hay que poner.
¿Vamos a escuchar testimonios?
Un caos, sí, dale. Acá está también Patricia Bullrich, estaban ahí supervisando.
At the moment, our crews are out tending to trees down, power lines down, working with the energy companies, where our focus is now turning to the floods, and that will continue over the next 2 or 3 days. We're expecting many of our river systems, if they're not already there, into flood, from minor to major.
very difficult to deal with the Canadian representatives.
U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening new tariffs on Canadian lumber and dairy products.
Canada has been ripping us off for years on tariffs.
The products were his latest targets on Friday, in a tariff saga that has given investors, businesses, and consumers whiplash. Just the day before, he suspended tariffs of 25% on most goods from Canada and Mexico, tariffs that he had imposed earlier in the week. Trump has said that reciprocal tariffs would be implemented on April 2nd instead, to equalize any duty rates between the three countries. Under the 2020 U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement on trade that he negotiated and signed, there are almost no tariffs on products crossing North American borders. Canada's high tariffs on dairy products to protect farmers is among the few exceptions.
They make it impossible for us to sell lumber or dairy products into Canada.
There are multiple other Trump tariff actions in play. Next Wednesday, Trump's administration will effectively raise tariffs on steel and aluminum. This will heap more duties on imports from Canada and Mexico, the biggest foreign suppliers of the metals. Canada's industry minister says that Ottawa's having a hard time understanding what needs to be done to avoid the tariffs. Trump also mentioned India's high tariff rates on Friday, but said the country had agreed to lower its import duties.
Aslında bu çalışma benim için sanat pratiğinden daha çok bir veda seremonisi gibi.
In fact, this work is more like a farewell ceremony, a spiritual journey for me, than an art practice. A friend of mine told me that there was a family from Hungary who was interested in my art. When I met the family, I learned that they wanted to immortalize their mother's memory. I had previously made portraits and paintings from sand. This thought led me to the idea of making portraits from ashes.
İlk gördüğümüzde tabii çok değişik duygular yaşadık.
When we first saw the portrait, of course, we experienced very different emotions. We looked at it a lot. We looked at the picture for a long time. Even when we passed in front of it, we passed by it a little bit, like we thought my mother-in-law was there. But then we got used to it over time. As I said, after that, it was like she was always with us, like she is there. It was a very nice feeling.
Oh my gosh, it's like lighting up the...
Social media video showed debris from a failed SpaceX Starship test flight raining down from the skies above the Bahamas Thursday. It marks the second consecutive failure this year for Elon Musk's Mars rocket program. The Starship's flight lasted just minutes after lifting off from facilities at Boca Chica, Texas. A SpaceX live stream of the mission showed it tumbling uncontrollably after multiple engines shut down.
You can see we've lost several engines and we've lost attitude control of the vehicle.
In a statement, SpaceX said the vehicle experienced a rapid, unscheduled disassembly and contact was lost. It wasn't clear if the explosion was caused by SpaceX's automated flight termination system, which triggers when something on the rocket goes wrong.
No way. What is that?
The Federal Aviation Administration briefly issued ground stops at airports in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, and Orlando because of space launch debris. It said it had opened a mishap investigation into the incident. The FAA said that means SpaceX must examine the failure's cause and get the agency's sign-off before Starship can fly again. SpaceX said there were no toxic materials among the debris. A month ago, the company's 7th Starship flight also ended in an explosive failure. The mishaps both happened in early mission phases SpaceX easily surpassed before. The back-to-back incidents mark a setback for a program Musk has sought to speed up this year.
Mob justice and vigilante killings have surged in eastern Congo's Bukavu, witnesses and a civil rights activist have said. That's since the city's capture by Rwanda-backed M23 rebels last month. That's left a vacuum after Congolese forces fled M23's rapid advance and due to a non-functioning justice system. Those killed, some burnt in the streets, have been accused of offences including theft, armed robbery and witchcraft. Bukavu-based human rights activist Amos Bisimwa said residents were taking justice into their own hands, partly because the city's police force has not stepped in.
This is why we are calling on the new authorities, managing the city and the province, to do everything necessary to ensure that justice resumes its activities quickly. Besides that, we want the police to return.
His organisation, the Observatory of Parliamentary and Governmental Actions in the Democratic Republic of Congo, recorded 11 deaths from attacks between Wednesday and Thursday. This man was burnt alive after being accused of theft. His sister told Reuters he was innocent. He is not a thief, she said. We found the fire over there, and he was burning in it. The M23 appointed Vice Governor of South Kivu province said there had been several cases of vigilante attacks driven by the behaviour of a population that feels threatened by these criminals. The M23 advance is the gravest escalation in more than a decade of the long-running conflict in eastern Congo, rooted in the spillover of Rwanda's 1994 genocide into Congo. Rwanda rejects allegations by Congo, the United Nations and Western powers that it supports M23 with arms and troops.
I intend to resign.
Canada will soon have a new Prime Minister after more than 9 years of Justin Trudeau's leadership. Who will replace him as the leader of the ruling Liberal Party and as the country's Prime Minister will be decided by party members and announced on March 9th. Reuters Canada Bureau Chief Caroline Stauffer explains how we got here.
The real precipitating factor actually happened in December, though, and that was when his finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, resigned in a very surprising way. He kind of took the holiday period to think about the best way forward, but he did, of course, end up resigning shortly after the holidays. But all indications from our reporting are that he had kind of intended to stay around and try to be the Liberal candidate for the next election.
Running to replace Trudeau is Mark Carney, a former central banker who doesn't hold a seat in Canada's legislature. He's running as an outsider with considerable financial experience. Chrystia Freeland, once Trudeau's closest ally, she led the renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement during US President Donald Trump's first term. The two remaining candidates are former cabinet minister Karina Gould and retired Liberal legislator Frank Baylis.
Well, it's going to be a wild ride.
Chief data scientist at Nanos Research Nick Nanos says even before the results have been released, rival Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre has already taken aim at a perceived frontrunner.
The Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre have come out swinging against Mark Carney like he's already won the leadership. So the expectation is that he's the front runner because of Pierre Poilievre's validation and also probably the amount of coin that Carney has raised.
With Trudeau at the helm, polls had indicated the Liberals were certain to lose the next election.
It was like the death spiral for the Liberal Party of Canada. Now fast forward, Justin Trudeau stepping down, Donald Trump slapping on tariffs, the Liberal leadership kicking into play, and that 27-point advantage that the federal Conservatives had has, for all intents and purposes, almost vanished.
The next federal election must be held by October 20th, but could come earlier or even almost immediately after Trudeau's replacement is named. Nanos says the next Liberal leader will have to work to separate themselves from the unpopular Trudeau, no matter who wins. But he says Canadian voters may be weighing other factors.
For Canadians, they may end up voting for a party that they don't like. They may end up voting for a leader that they don't like, because the fundamental ballot question is not going to be, is it time for change, which is what we thought it was until 6 weeks ago. It is going to be, who can best manage the relationship with Donald Trump?
If every country emphasizes its own national priorities and believes only in strength and status, the world will regress to the law of the jungle. Small and weak countries will bear the brunt, and international rules and order will be severely impacted. Major powers should assume international obligations and fulfill their responsibilities as major powers. They should not be profit-driven, and they should not bully the weak. No country should expect to suppress and contain China on one hand, while maintaining good relations with China on the other. This kind of two-faced approach is not conducive to stable bilateral relations and will not build mutual trust.
We said to ourselves, we've had really bad luck here. It's a pretty weird situation.
The point I was making is, how do you discover suddenly, after all these years, on the tracks even, with all the trains I went through, so it seems strange to me, the whole thing, but hey, until we know further, it's nothing you can do but wait.
The World Health Organization has said it will send leprosy drugs to Nigeria this weekend. That's after a year-long delay that left thousands of patients, including children, without the medicine they need to prevent disability. Nigeria ran out of stock of the multi-drug therapy in early 2024, as bureaucratic delays and new testing regulations held up the drugs in India. At a hospital in Nasarawa State, leprosy patient Awul Musa said before last year her condition had been improving, but now her wounds and her pain are worse. WHO data shows that Nigeria is one of 12 countries reporting between 1,000 to 10,000 leprosy cases annually, behind Brazil, India, and Indonesia. The disease is caused by a bacterium that mainly affects the skin, peripheral nerves, and eyes. It's curable, but without treatment, the disease progresses and causes disfiguring sores and disabilities like blindness and paralysis. Kuza Thomas is a director at the hospital.
So complication is the most difficult aspect. If they lose their finger, where are you going to get the finger and give them again? If they lose their sight, who is going to give them sight? So what we are afraid is even the complication. As they are staying without the drug, the disease is progressing day by day.
Countries request leprosy doses from the WHO annually. Health sources said Nigeria's request was late. The country's National Tuberculosis and Leprosy Control did not respond to a request for comment. Sunday Udo, who heads the non-profit Leprosy Mission Nigeria, described it as a very strange, very painful situation, where the leprosy patients who belong to the poorest of the poor were not able to access this life-saving medication.